meeting for April 16th. And as I mentioned, I'm up at the council chambers, and the rest of you are hopefully at home and on Skype. And it'll be very similar, I suppose, to the other meetings that we've had in the last few weeks. A little bit different because I can't see you, but I think you can probably see each other. But I think, as far as I know, everything seems to be working well. And if there is difficulty, please speak up, or I guess email or text or whatever, the same sort of process. So what I'd like to do is call the meeting to order. And what I'm going to ask the clerk to run through the rules and the way we're going to do business, and perhaps some housekeeping, and then do a roll call also.
Thank you, and good morning. I will briefly review the rules and protocols for electronic participation. During the meeting, the region will comply with provincial orders, public health orders, and recommendations to support social distancing, as well as prohibiting public gatherings of more than 5 people. The meeting is being streamed live from the Region of Peel website, which we don't usually do for our committee meetings, but we are doing that now. And the public are requested to stay home in accordance with provincial and public health recommendations and are encouraged to view online. All those in council chambers have been screened, and we have purposely spaced people in the chambers more than 2 meters from each other to maintain a physical distance. The people present in council chambers are our committee chair, Councillor Starr, myself, committee clerk Jill Jones, and 3 clerk staff to facilitate the technology and procedures for this meeting. We are conducting the meeting using Skype. We do have technical staff available to assist our committee members and delegation. If you do experience difficulties or lose connection during the meeting, please send an email to council@peelregion.ca with your issue and a phone number so that a technician can call you and respond to your issue. The email, council@peelregion.ca, will be monitored throughout the meeting. Please remember that if your device runs out of battery or goes to sleep, you may be logged off during the meeting. So please keep your device charged and awake to assist with connectivity. For an optimum Skype experience, we ask that you take the following measures to avoid feedback and confusion with members speaking over one another. Please keep your microphones muted unless you have the floor to speak. If possible, use a headset and avoid using hands-free devices or speakers. Please speak loudly and clearly when you have the floor. Ensure that any surrounding environmental noise, such as televisions, radios, and pets, is eliminated. You will have Skype video capability, and you may activate your video while you are speaking, although you are not required to activate your video feed. Should you wish to enable your video, you may do so by clicking on the video camera icon located next to the microphone icon and then clicking Start My Video. Your video will not be recorded, as only audio is live streamed and recorded. When you have finished speaking, please turn off your video, as presentations cannot be seen while your video is activated. During the meeting, you will see the regional logo on your screen, as we have not activated the chamber cameras for this meeting. During the delegation and staff presentation, the slides will be visible on your screens. If there are any questions from members regarding the delegation or staff presentation, they should be directed through the chair. And as members participating electronically do not have access to the usual request to speak button, if you wish to speak, please send an email to council@peelregion.ca, and you will be added to a speakers list in the order of receipt of the emails. When you are called upon, please unmute your speaker and proceed. When you have concluded your comment or question, please mute your speaker. If you ask a question, the chair will call upon the most appropriate person to respond. After the response, the chair will circle back to you for any follow-up and to confirm that you have yielded the floor. If you have any motions to introduce regarding business on the approved agenda, please email your motion to the same email, council@peelregion.ca, identifying yourself as the mover, and as this is committee, a seconder is not required. With regard to voting, each motion will be read in its entirety prior to calling a vote, and voting will be conducted verbally. However, for committee votes, such as motions to receive that do not require a recorded vote, The chair will call for any objections. If you have an objection, please unmute your microphone and indicate your name and objection. If no objections are stated, the motion will be deemed to be adopted. If there is an objection, then we would conduct the vote. If that's required, I will call upon each member in alphabetical order based on last name. And once called upon, please unmute your microphone and indicate your yes or no vote. I will confirm the vote for each member. This process may take some time, so please have patience. If you do not respond when you're called upon to vote, your name will be called a second time. If you do not respond to the second call, you will be recorded as abstaining from the vote, and your vote will count in the negative as a nay vote. If you have advised that you are leaving the meeting, you will be marked as absent for the vote. If you don't advise that you are leaving the meeting and you don't respond when called upon to vote, you will be considered to be abstaining, and a vote will be recorded in the negative. With regard to closed sessions, should there be a qualified reason for this meeting to move into closed session, I will review the closed session rules at that time. If you have any questions as we proceed through the meeting, please send them to the noted email, council@peelregion.ca, together with your request to speak. To ensure that we maintain quorum, also send an email to the same email to indicate if you are leaving the meeting and provide an email when you are returning. We will monitor the email and will also monitor the Skype participants list to ensure we maintain quorum. I will now be calling the roll call. Please indicate your presence by responding here when called upon. Councillor Dasco.
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Member Fairhead. Member Fairhead, are you there? We see Member Fairhead in our list, but we're not getting an audio response. Member Fairhead, you've been...
Sorry.
No.
Apologies, my system hung. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Fonseca.
Yes, here.
Thank you. Chair Yanika.
Here?
Thank you. Councillor Raz.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Santos.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Sinclair.
Yes, present.
Thank you. Member Zuberi.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. And Councillor Starr is sitting next to me
Yes.
and present. Thank you very much, and I'm passing the meeting back to our chair, Councillor Starr.
Wow, that's we should have these more often. That's 100% attendance, so we're all going to get little gold stars. Okay, let's go through the agenda in a normal fashion. And are there any declarations of conflict of interest? If I don't hear responses back, I'll assume that we're all in favor. I think probably in the same fashion that we're following other meetings online, etc. So, any declarations of conflict of interest? Hearing none, we'll move on to the approval of the agenda. Any suggestions, changes?
I'll approve it, Mr. Chair. It's Councillor Raz.
Okay, it's been moved by Councillor Rass. All those in favor? And again, if I don't hear a response, it'll be approved. Okay? The first item, number 4, is a delegation from Trevor Ferguson, our audit partner from Deloitte, and it's to tell us about the audit results related to 5.2. Just before we get started there, just so that we do know, in the reports, we will be moving 5.1 to the very end as 5.8. So just so you know that in case you are watching or listening and we skip over it. So back to you, Trevor, and tell us a little bit about the results.
Thank you very much, Councillor Starr, and hopefully everybody can hear me okay. I trust that somebody will interrupt if they can't. So thank you very much. Thank you for putting up on the screen the audit results report that starts on page 5.2-3 of your package. On my screen, it's quite small. But hopefully everybody has another copy in front of them, or they can make it a little bigger on their screen. Before I get started, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Stephen, Steph, and Sandy, and the rest of the finance team at the region for all of their help throughout the audit process. It was a very smooth audit process. We really enjoy working with the team, with the finance team at the region, and appreciate all their help. You've got a pretty good team in place, and we really like working with you guys, and I hope the feeling is mutual, and it was a successful audit, so thank you very much.
Sorry, Trevor, it's Councillor Raz. Can I just interject here? Which, you have a lot of items, but there's nothing on, whenever anybody speaks, whatever presentation was shown on the screen goes away. So what item are you referring to now? I'm assuming it's in our package.
Yes, so I'm looking at the audit results report that starts on page 5.2-3 of your package.
Thank you.
Trevor, it's Chris Fonseca. I just wanted to echo what Councillor Rass was saying, that the presentation, and we experienced this at the regional council last week, whenever you speak, the presentation disappears. So I think it is a technical glitch that perhaps, I don't know, at that end could be worked on, but just wanted to say that I'm experiencing the same thing. Okay.
No, thank you for bringing that to my attention. Jill, or I don't know if anybody there wants to, if there's a possible remedy to that, or if we should just press on and we'll make sure that we highlight the page numbers that we're referring to.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to skip ahead in our presentation to page 5.2-6. The title of that page is Our Audit Explained. So what we're doing over a couple of pages here is just to speak to our audit process and the results that we had. So first on 5.2-6 on the top left-hand corner, there's a box called Audit Scope in Terms of Engagement. Needless to say, we performed our audit exactly in accordance with the audit plan that we presented to this committee last fall, and there were no changes whatsoever. I'm going to skip over audit risks for now because I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in just a minute. And on the bottom half of the page, there is a small box called materiality. Obviously, we don't test every transaction that takes place at the region over the course of the year. So we do perform our audits with the concept of materiality in mind. We based our materiality for the region on total expenses, and we have a reporting threshold to this committee, which is quite low if we were to identify any misstatements to bring to your attention. If I could ask you to scroll to the next page, 5.2-7. On the top right-hand corner, there's a small box called misstatements. I'll get to that in a minute, in a few pages when we get there. And after I do, Steph, I'm just teeing you up that I understand that you also wanted to speak to the matter. So when we get there, I will I'll mute myself and give you the opportunity to speak as well. So the other things that I'll highlight on this page, in terms of uncorrected disclosure misstatements, there are none. So what that means is that in our opinion, your financial statements disclose everything that they're required to in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. With respect to status and outstanding matters on the top left-hand corner of that page, there are a few bullet points of things that are outstanding. The only reason why those are outstanding is because the financial statements have not been approved yet. Once that happens, we'll be able to get those taken care of. We have absolutely everything that we need from management at this stage. If I could ask to move to the next page, 5.2-8. On the top half of that page, there are two boxes, one called fraud risk, the other independence. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on fraud risk. Needless to say, as we discussed as part of our audit plan presentation, in our role as the external auditors of the region, we are required to consider the risk of fraud as part of our audit of your financial statements. We performed a number of procedures in that regard as we're required to, and we did not identify anything unusual. With respect to independence, it will come as no surprise that we're required to be independent in order to be able to provide you with an independent auditor's report. So we are independent, and we've attached an independence letter as one of the appendices to this document. The last thing that I'm going to touch on this page is just with respect to significant accounting practices, judgments, and estimates. There are a number of estimates that go into the preparation of your financial statements. So I won't list them all here. Some of them are listed in one of the notes to your financial statements. Some of the bigger ones would be around certain accrued liabilities, employee future benefits, things like that. I think what's important to note here is that we are comfortable with the process that management has for determining and evaluating their estimates. And we as your auditors are comfortable with the estimates themselves. If I could ask us to flip to the next page, the next couple of pages, 5.2-9 and -10. What we've done is just copy and paste directly out of our audit plan the audit risks that we identified in that document. And down the right-hand side, we've added a column for our audit results. So I won't go through all of these points, given that we did touch upon them as part of the audit plan presentation. You'll note that there's a little asterisk beside revenue and deferred revenue, as well as management override of controls. And again, that is because Canadian audit standards require that we presume a risk of fraud around those areas. That is not; those are not risks that are unique to the region or any municipality for that matter. That's the same for any audit of any financial statements conducted in Canada. So as you can see, for all of our audit results here, we've identified them as being no significant issues noted as a result of the testing, which is a good thing, except for that one piece under tangible capital assets, and that's getting to the misstatement that I mentioned a couple of times, and I will get to it, I promise. So I'm going to skip on to other reportable matters. That starts on page 5.2-13 of your package. Thank you. So a few things here. In terms of changes to our audit plan, again, there were none. Significant difficulties encountered in performing the audit. Absolutely none, given the comments that I raised right off the top of my presentation. The last thing that I would note, just around post-balance sheet events, when we finalized this report, we weren't aware of any significant post-balance sheet events. This was long before COVID-19 really began in earnest in Canada, if you will. So we don't believe that the region is going to requires any financial statement disclosure as a subsequent event in relation to COVID-19. Many for-profit companies and some other public sector organizations with March 31st year ends are considering adding some disclosure. We've had discussions with the region, and we don't believe, with region management, we don't believe it's necessary at this point to include any disclosure in your statements, but wanted everybody to know that it's something that we have considered. If we could flip to the appendices, so the next page that starts on 5.2-14, Appendix 1, Communication Requirements. So over the course of these next two pages, what we've done is highlight the 21 communication requirements directly out of Canadian audit standards. And on the right-hand side, we've added a column to tell you where we've told you about all of these items. Most of them are identified as being none or none noted, which is always a good thing coming from us. And the other pieces simply reference to other pages in this report or to our audit plan or engagement letter. So nothing of incredible significance to identify here. Appendix 2, which starts on page 5.2-16 of your package. That is our independence letter. This is a standard letter stating that we're independent and thus able to provide you with that independent auditor's report. Appendix 3, so I'll speak briefly just to this. This is the summary of misstatements. That starts on page 5.2-19. And Steph will make a few comments and then I'll pass it to you. So this relates into linear assets held by the region that were abandoned in years 2018 and prior. This was something that was brought to the attention of the finance department after the fact, after they had been disposed of. So these were accounted for, they were previously included in the net book value of tangible capital assets in 2018 and years prior when they had already been disposed of. It isn't just one disposal, this is a combination of a number of disposals. So technically, accounting standards would dictate that the region should restate its 2018 financial statements as a result of this. Given the fact that this number, while big, is a very low percentage of the tangible capital asset balance held by the region, management has decided not to restate the financial statements, and we very much concur with that assessment and do not believe that the prior year statement should be restated. So this is the representation. Given that this is above our reporting threshold of communicating misstatements, we're required to bring it to the attention of this committee to identify that it is an uncorrected misstatement. But I would reiterate once again that we do not believe that the prior year statement should be restated as a result of this. So, Steph, I will pause there and give you an opportunity to speak as well.
Thank you, Trevor. Can everybody hear me? I hope so. Good morning to committee members, and I did want to, before I talk about the misstatement, just briefly thank staff and our auditors. It was a very smooth audit year. In terms of the misstatement, I just wanted to explain a little bit of detail around this because it is a large number when you look at it in isolation. And so essentially, when we look at these, when we do our team work every year, the accounting team's year-end preparations, they do a lot of review of regional council reports and different items to ensure that we're finding all of the impacts that we need to for the year-end financial statements. In this past year, the team actually discovered through reviewing of those reports, there was an item on expansion work on the 401 and QEW where it mentioned linear assets being abandoned and replaced as a result of the expansion work. And that's when we noted that that wasn't given to us in terms of adding to our tangible capital asset disposals. So the team went back and worked with Public Works, with the financial support unit and program staff, and discovered that this was a process where we weren't getting the information. So tangible capital assets came into place in 2008. And in recording of those assets at the time, staff would have looked at the linear assets as a whole. We would have come up with estimates around kind of the average life of sections of those assets and valuations accordingly. So by not removing those pieces as we went along, the result was that 38.5 million difference that was found. So we did report that actually to our auditors, and we worked in conjunction looking at what was the best way to move with this. And as Trevor noted, our tangible capital assets level is quite significant. We have about $11.6 billion in tangible capital assets. So the 38.5 million is a third of 1% of all tangible capital assets, and which is why we made the materiality decision. And in looking at the financial statements, the amount itself wouldn't cause anybody to have a material miscommunication in terms of what is in the statements. So we identified it, we talked to the auditors, we made that decision, and we've corrected for future years, so the assets will be correct. And as well, we've worked with the asset the Public Works team and their counterparts to ensure that we have a process in place for that type of replacement work and abandonment that does occur. So I just wanted to ensure the committee members that everything makes sense, and we do have things in control for future years, but sometimes along the lines we do find issues, and as we do, we make sure that we discuss with audit and determine what the best approach is. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Are there any questions out in the among the members?
Yes, Mr. Chair, it's Councillor Raz.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. If we're just talking about the linear assets, it was recognized in 2019, so we know that this is done in previous years, but we haven't gone previous to 2019 to look at what those amounts of stranded assets were, and have we done an analysis if those assets were abandoned? Were they abandoned before their life expectancy? And how is that being treated financially?
Through the chair to Councillor Raz, we actually did an analysis. So we determined in the 2020 audit of 2019 statements, we determined the asset issue. The 38.5 million actually goes back. We went back in time to look at all of the pieces to determine the gross amount. So as Trevor mentioned, that reflects a total for the period of time that was from when TCAs came in until our current statement. So we have gone back. We looked at. I didn't do this myself, but the Public Works and Finance staff worked together, and they went through GIS data and all the information they had on various works. In terms of whether or not they had life left on them, I don't have all of the details of every transaction in front of me. I know the work was done. We could probably provide some more information. But I will tell you that in terms of the tangible capital asset data, for municipalities, when the work was done in 2008, some assumptions had to go into kind of the existing lifespan on some areas from an accounting perspective rather than kind of an asset management perspective. So the two are similar but have some differences in the accounting. For accounting purposes, there are some assumptions made on average lifespans versus when exactly a specific piece went into play, just because of the volume of the data. And as we move forward, obviously new items come on, we have the exact information, we're able to track that, and then with new asset management systems, it's much easier down the road. So the data tends to get more and more accurate over time. A lot of assumptions had to be made in 2008. So.
Okay, and as you work with a asset management team, the more, like you said, the more accurate data we get, we'll be able to better financially plan. I know that in some cases assets are lasting longer than previously expected, and others less. So
yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully that'll be worked into future financial outlooks going forward. Okay, that's all I had on the linear assets. I did have a question for staff, also related to 5.2. Can I ask that now, Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Under the, hold on, let me scroll back here. The 2019 Deloitte Audit Results Report, this is in reference to I will give you a page, 5.2-2. One of the things that keeps popping up in all audit reports, whether I'm seeing it at the City of Mississauga or the Region of Peel, is that the checks and balances and control matters that we have in place when it always comes back to staff access to our systems. In this case, it was the customer care and billing system. When we terminate employees or employees move to different parts of the organization, those access issues keep cropping up, and I know I've been dealing with them for the last 6 years or so, and I'm just wondering from an IT perspective, why don't we have those policies and procedures in place by now to deal with the disabling of accounts for terminated staff?
So it's Sean here, and I can speak to that one.
Okay, thanks, Sean.
Yeah, so there certainly are procedures in place to deal with both of what is indicated here, the access to controls within the systems, and then of course the revocation of accounts. What we experienced is the rarity of some of these activities does mean that the policies and procedures aren't properly followed in all cases. So some of this has brought up the fact that there's some disconnect happening between the operations team and the technology team. And so we've already committed to going back and looking at those processes to ensure that we have timely communication in place. But I can assure you that the right policies are there and that the practices exist and certainly can be followed. We have to follow up a little bit more diligently on those cases where something has fallen through the cracks. And with respect to with respect to the controls around access to profiles, this one is also a unique case simply because we have a somewhat decentralized model in how we control access to this particular application. So while it does indicate that there are operational staff that have access to that CC&B application, it is a distinct group of people from those who perform the transactions. So it's not the IT team that sets it, it is still an operational team, but within their team they've segregated that access, if that helps.
Yeah, that helps. I think it's just an item that keeps coming up in many audits that I see, and it's something that just leaves us a little bit open to risk and abuse. So if you can maybe report back at a future meeting, and if we can get a little bit more granular detail about how we are managing this aspect of our business, that'd be appreciated.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Neil, I think you wanted to speak to one of the issues or or comment on one of the areas. Neil, are you out there?
Hello. Yes, I'm just having trouble unmuting. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, I'm not an accountant, but I have spent some time in information systems and services, and I'm very interested in the information quality aspects. Now, here we have an opportunity where an outside team has had a good look at a lot of our information, and I have a simple question which might be slightly off track, but in which case slap me down. But I would like to know, I suspect from Mr. Ferguson, are they content with the quality of the information they've received? And I'm thinking in specific terms of the way the MIT information quality defines information quality. Sound, dependable, useful, usable. Would it be appropriate to, through you, ask for a comment on that?
Certainly, it's Trevor Ferguson speaking. So I guess I want to put the question in the context of an audit. So and what the scope of our work obviously is to provide you with an opinion on the presentation of your financial statements. Part of our work it requires us to test the general computer controls in place at the region that are responsible for getting financial data into the general ledger. So that is the scope of the work that we do around the general computer controls in place at the region. And I can say that we did not identify any significant deficiencies. We obviously have these two management letter comments. I thank Councillor Rass for bringing it up because that was the next place that I was going to go to, so I appreciate that. But I could say that we are confident that the data that we receive and the quality that we receive is good.
Neil, does that answer your question? Neil, are you there?
Yes, I'm still having challenges with going on and off mute. It's a good start. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be content with that for the moment.
Okay, are there any further questions or comments? Hearing none, Neil, will you move the delegation be received?
I so move.
Are there any objections? Hearing none, the motion will presume passes. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on now to 5.3. This and all the reports, by the way, are for information, just so you know. Oh, I'm sorry. I saw Deloitte and I just skipped right by it. Okay, so then what we need to do is to receive the report from Deloitte. Can I have a mover? Councillor Sinclair?
I can move it, Mr. Chair.
Yes, I can move it. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Sinclair. Okay, that the report be received. Are there any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you very much. Okay, now we'll go on to 5.3. As you've probably noticed, all the information items are following. So this is the Region of Peel Consolidated Financial Statements. And again, I'll ask for any questions or comments. Staff are, of course, here for any information. Do I hear any requests to speak? Nothing? Okay, that I'll have a motion to be received, and I'll just pick names because I can't see you, but Councillor Fonseca?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I'll move it.
Okay, that the report be received. Are there any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes. Okay, we'll move on to 5.4, which is Peel Housing, the financial statements, and again, that's for information. And are there any questions, comments, changes, clarification? Hearing none, will
Raz can move it, Mr. Chair.
Councillor, I'm sorry?
Councillor Raz.
Okay, Councillor Raz, that the report be received. Are there any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes. Okay, the next one is the Region Appeal Sinking Fund financial statements, 5.5. Questions, comments? Hearing none. Councillor Daskell, will you move that?
I will.
Okay, the motion has been moved. Are there any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes. 5.6 is the Peel Trust Funds financial statements, here for information again. Any questions, comments? Hearing none, do I have a mover to have the report received? Councillor Santos?
Sure, no problem.
Okay. That the report be received. Are there any objections? Hearing none, the motion passes. We're on to 5.7, which is the Emergency Shelter Operations Audit. And this is a presentation by Janice Sheehy. Janice, I'm not sure who's making it, but I see there's 2 or 3 of you online.
Yes, thank you. So I am not starting the presentation. I'll hand it over to Jennifer and Aileen.
Okay, good morning. Jennifer Weinman here. So I will kick off the presentation. Good morning to the members of the committee. This morning, Aileen, Janice, and myself will be presenting the results of the Emergency Shelter Operations Contract Management Audit. Can you advance the slide, please? Overall, there were not effective contract management oversight controls in place at the time the audit was conducted. As related to the fire safety systems, we found that there were effective controls in place over the approval of the fire safety plans and the annual inspection of the fire safety systems. We found that there are opportunities to develop and strengthen the contract management oversight controls. Next slide, please. During the presentation this morning, I will outline the objectives of the audit and each outstanding audit observation. Aileen and Janice will provide the management response to the audit observations, and then I will conclude the presentation. Next slide, please. The objective of the audit of the emergency shelter operations was to evaluate if effective contract management controls were in place. We specifically looked at compliance reviews, oversighting of staff at the shelters, fire safety, case management, monitoring of the performance of the vendors, and the reconciliation of overflow costs. Since the audit work has wrapped up, Aileen and her team have been implementing a number of action plans to address the risks we noted during the audit. In the next couple of slides, Aileen and I will discuss the audit observations and the management action plans for those that remain in progress at this time. Next slide, please. Related to the observation to undertake reviews and reports for compliance monitoring, management has implemented the use of an agency narrative to document and track vendor performance concerns and has implemented a process to conduct quarterly compliance reviews. There is one component of compliance oversight that is outstanding, and work is underway to have third-party compliance audits undertaken as required by the contract. By implementing all components noted in the report for compliance monitoring, management will address the risk related to not being aware if the contract is being complied with. I will now turn over to Aileen, and she will provide more information on the work that is being undertaken to monitor compliance with the contract related to third-party audits. Aileen?
Thank you, Jennifer, and good morning, members of the committee. Yes, the one outstanding action is related to third-party compliance, and that work was underway prior to the COVID response. It has been slowed down as a result of our COVID response, and I did want to let the committee know that this work may be delayed, but it certainly will be completed in as timely a manner as possible once work starts to normalize. So the deadline was originally July 31st. We are going to try to meet that deadline, but there is a risk that that may be delayed. Jennifer, I'll send it back to you.
Thank you, Aileen. And can we have the next slide, please? The other observation that remains outstanding relates to developing a process to ensure that the testing of the fire safety and evacuation plan is conducted in accordance with the Ontario Fire Codes and the requirements of the contract. Addressing this observation helps to mitigate the risk of knowing that the shelter staff are prepared in the event of an emergency to execute the evacuation plan. Sorry, there was a lot of E's there. Aileen will now provide more information about the work to address this audit observation. Aileen?
Yeah, so thank you very much. I can confirm for the committee that the process with Peel Housing Corporation, who is the property manager for the shelters, a process is now documented. An outside firm conducts monthly inspections of equipment and provides reports to Peel Housing Corporation. Fire drills at each shelter are taking place 2 times a year, which includes training as well as a review of the safety plan, and a schedule has now been developed. However, the drills that were scheduled for March and April have not happened, again, due to the COVID outbreak. We have started work with Peel Housing Corporation to create the formal process and documented process to provide housing as the contract owner, with verification that these activities are in fact happening and the fire code requirements are being met. Now, this work was slowed down due to COVID. However, we are meeting, in fact, with Peel Housing Corporation's management team tomorrow, and this is on the agenda, and we will be able to meet the April deadline.
Thank you, Aileen. And can you advance the slide, please? At this time, I am going to turn over to Janice, who will provide some additional management comments and response.
Thank you, Jennifer. With the committee's indulgence, I felt it important to provide some overall context to this audit. In particular, given that the Director of Housing, Aileen Baird, is tasked with implementing the recommendations, but did not actually take on responsibility for the administration of emergency shelters until just before this audit began. In late 2018, I began the planning to make 2 organizational changes in my department, in part to address some of the issues you see raised in this audit. The first, a move of homelessness programs and services, including emergency shelter operations and their contract administration, from the Community Access Ontario Works Division to the Housing Division. This was done to improve the focus on the role emergency shelters play in achieving the outcomes of the Peel Housing and Homelessness Plan, to help people get and keep housing. Secondly, a review of my department's business services division that over time had evolved to take on accountabilities for many program outcomes rather than just supporting the department to achieve those outcomes. In other words, the accountability between this business division and the program division had become unclear in a lot of areas, including contract development. The implementation of this review will result in changes to my department's organizational structure and is focused on ensuring that there are clear accountabilities for all functions and outcomes. I'll now turn this back to Jennifer. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Janice. In conclusion, management has addressed a number of the audit observations through the implementation of strengthened internal controls, and work is underway, as discussed, to ensure that effective contract management oversight controls are in place. My team and I will continue to work with Aileen and her team as they implement the remainder of the action plans, and we will report back to the committee through the regular follow-up process. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time, and we would be happy to take any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much. Very revealing. Okay, we'll move on to the committee members for questions or comments. Councillor Rass.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation, ladies. I guess a little disappointing to see such an audit where there's so many areas where we may be letting our vulnerable clients slip through the cracks. If I can just go to the audit that talks about having a suitable level of education or experience in working with the vulnerable people, what are some of the things that you found? And in particular, there may have been gaps with respect to police checks, their training, and other aspects, but were there incidents that would have flagged these sooner, or how? Can you get into a little bit more detail on the staffing issues as a result of the audit?
Okay, it's Jennifer here. So I want to be clear that what we looked at when we did this audit was not an audit of the Salvation Army and the practices in place at the Salvation Army. We looked at the oversight controls that the region has in place. So we are not saying that anything was happening or not happening at the Salvation Army in terms of shelter staff. We are saying that the region should have a process in place that when we've put in some requirements in the contract that the staff have certain things, that we have a process to oversight that is happening. So we are not saying that there was anything wrong with staffing at the shelters. We're just saying the region should have a process to check on that.
And I guess you're saying we because we don't have a process, we don't really know.
I would say we don't have a formal process to know. We have staff in Aileen's team who are in conversation and interaction with shelter operator staff. So It's just more about that formal process to check and to document and have that a level of assurance for ourselves in human services that the right processes are being followed by the Salvation Army.
And how, prior to it going into Eileen's area in 2019, how long was this contract in place for, and were there any previous audits done in this area?
Okay, it's Jennifer here. I can answer that we have not, as far as I am aware, in the 14 years I've been in the audit group, conducted an audit related to the shelter operations, and I don't think we did prior to that. And I'm going to say that I believe that this contract was in place since 2014. Yes, it became effective January 2014.
All right. Okay, if I have any other questions, which I probably will because it was a pretty lengthy appendix, I'll follow up with Eileen directly. Thank you.
It's Aileen here. I'm wondering, Chair, if I may also address Councillor Raz's question.
Sure, go ahead, yes. Yes.
So thank you very much, Councillor Raz, for your question. And well, my answer won't provide you with the complete assurance you're looking for. I think you've hit on what is a general theme across all of the audit findings, which is that the processes in place historically within this team have been very informal. They've been informal, but they were happening. And so this is the finding in many areas. So while staff were meeting with the Salvation Army, discussing matters of performance, the discussions were informal, and some of the rigor around the documentation was not happening. And so what we're doing, I'm very grateful for the audit results, because it does allow us to start to shift expectations and change the culture, not only within housing, but as Janice mentioned, under her leadership across the whole division, and reset expectations so that we move from informal conversations and sort of direct observation that things are happening at the shelter to something that's more formal and more appropriate. So that's underway not only for staffing, but also for all aspects of performance. So while it doesn't provide you with the assurance you're looking for, I do want to emphasize that the oversight was happening and has always happened in an informal way.
And are we going to formalize that with our other shelter contracts?
Absolutely. So I think we are addressing this head on and are going to formalize all of our processes with all shelter operations as a result of this audit. The information is useful, very timely, and is assisting sort of with getting those tighter controls in place across the board.
And what is the new, or assuming, because we're in a strange time right now, when are we going to get a report back on this to this committee as an update?
Okay, I'm not sure, but I'm happy to speak to Jennifer about that. We can set a date and get back in short order.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions?
Yes. Mr. Chair, it's Chris Fonseca. I sent an email to request to be on the list, but so I'm not sure if you're seeing me.
No, I'm not, but go ahead, Councillor Fonseca.
Okay, thank you very much. First off, I just wanted to say echo that I think this audit has, I'm glad, I find it hard to believe that it has been this long since an audit has been done. I believe it was raised, having this done was raised maybe 5 or 6 years ago when there was when we were looking at restructuring human services and health services. It might have been 6 or 7 years ago now. I do want to say, in terms of the effective contract management controls that are now formally going to be put in place. I think it's extremely important. Having both Our Place Peel and Family Shelter in place and reading through this audit, I just want to thank everyone for all that has gone into this. And Janice, in terms of the and Eileen, in terms of the organizational restructuring around accountabilities, to make sure that it is very clear as to who and what is accountable to which part of the management and the programming. In particular, at the family shelter, there's family shelter that's there. You also have the daycare that's there. You also have many refugees and newcomers that are coming into the shelter. So I do believe this organizational restructuring is extremely important, and I'm glad that it's happening. I did have a couple of questions. So within the audit that was taking place, and maybe it wasn't part of the actual audit, but were management controls around the food safety? And I mean, I know that fire safety was brought up, but was there anything brought up around the food safety controls?
Through the chair, this is Jennifer. The food component of the contract was not selected for audit, so the audit focused just on the 6 items that I noted. So we did not do any work on our oversight, the region's oversight of the food safety.
Okay, well, I think at some point, again, because I have the shelter, the family shelter in particular, and I guess it would apply to any shelter, perhaps somewhere at some point in the near future that be looked at and considered. And I can speak offline to whoever would be the appropriate person about that. With regards to the fire safety, there unfortunately was recently a fire at the family shelter, and is it possible when the update report comes back, when the next report comes back, will there be any learnings that are taken from this situation?
It's Aileen, and I can certainly take that back and ensure that we incorporate the lessons learned and include them in the report back. So I'm happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. And then question just around comments around, so with regards to at the family shelter, there is the, I guess, informal, or I don't know, formal or informal daycare structure or child minding that is there. Will further information be brought back again in terms of the organizational restructuring around that programming and as well? And will that be, my understanding is that at the family shelter, that is part of the overall responsibility or contract in the case of the family shelter, the Salvation Army. Will in the future, or lessons learned through this audit, will that be a separate contract, or like if this model rolls out in other shelters? I know this is a family shelter. Will that type of, will that be a separate contract, or will that be evaluated separately? Yes, I know that just in terms of the daycare there, that is another whole responsibility that has been placed on the Salvation Army as well.
So through you, Chairman, it's Aileen. So Councillor Fonseca and committee members, so there is no longer a child care program operating out of the Peel Family Shelter. When the region got out of the direct delivery of child care, that program was actually wound down. So now there's an expectation that families are caring for their children while at the shelter. And this is also consistent with the shift in philosophy where we want the shelter to be a place that is safe and comfortable for clients, but does not include programming which actually encourages them to want to stay for an extended amount of time. So,
sorry, Aileen, it's Janice. If I could just speak to that as well, I apologize. I also wanted to emphasize to Councillor Fonseca and to the committee members that we do work with the clients at the shelter to make sure the appropriate supports are in place. So if a client is undertaking a job search, we will provide them with fee subsidy to ensure that they have childcare.
Okay, because I guess it's informal, but I hear, again, because I have that shelter, the shelter is in Ward 3, I do hear about, and perhaps it's my misinterpretation of informal child minding, I guess, that's happening at that shelter. So that's why I raised that. Anyway, it's something that I guess I can take offline further with you. So thank you very much. And I guess my only other question, Councillor Ross asked, it was just with regards to when can we be expecting the next report to come back? That was already answered. So thank you very much.
Sorry, through the chair, this is Jennifer here. I just have one point of clarification on Councillor Fonseca's first question, if I may.
Sure, go ahead.
So when you mentioned you would be looking for an audit of food safety to be conducted in the near future, were you meaning a contract management oversight audit as we have performed in evaluating how Aileen's team is oversighting food safety, or were you referring to someone from the region doing an audit of the Salvation Army's food safety practices?
I think it's the Salvation Army's food practices.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there further questions? Hearing none, maybe I can get some clarification from staff. And when I hear the word contract, contracts mean financials, and I'm not really clear as to how the whole system works. Because this has been an eye-opener insofar as what's been has been happening in the past, and I'd like to know the contracts, I guess, that we have with the vendors. Are those reviewed? Are they out for public tender, or do we just carry on with the same vendors? Can you just give me an explanation?
So this is Aileen, and thank you, Councillor Starr, for your question. So there has not been a lot of changeover in the provider. Salvation Army has long been the region's provider in our adult shelter system, and so there hasn't been a lot of the RFPs have not been competed on frequently. So I think part of the response moving forward and to address some of the risk in this audit is actually the contract itself. So the contract needs to change, and it does need to be out to the market and competitively bid on. And in fact, we were well underway in doing that. And the RFP was to go out, and then COVID hit. And so we made the decision not to put the RFP out because it's very difficult for the Salvation Army and other providers in the community who may be interested in responding. They just simply can't get to it right now because they're very busy dealing with the emergency on the ground. So as soon as things get back to normal, we will be issuing the RFP, and a big part of the solution is a new contract. The new contract, we've been working with procurement, is far more performance-based. It has different requirements, and I do think that part of the solution is looking at possibly a different provider. So I think we are shifting from what has been happening historically and setting ourselves up for greater success in the future. And I'll also add that we've already spoken about the need to move from sort of informal contract management to formal contract management, and that's certainly underway. But some of the other changes that I'd like the committee to be aware of is right now, the Salvation Army manages the contracts with hotels, for example, for Overflow. The Salvation Army manages the contracts with food providers. So as we're renewing the contract, we're also asking ourselves if we should make those changes. And I can let the committee know that, for example, we will be now managing the contract with the hotels, as opposed to having that be managed through the Salvation Army. So we are tightening up those controls to ensure that we have proper oversight in place on all fronts.
I just wanted to add to that, it's Janice, that any extensions to the contracts have been approved through council report, with the last one coming to council on November the 14th.
Well, that's fine to say that, but I think most of those reports, when we see those are just hands up and we vote on it and it's done. I think having gone through the audit, it really opens up our eyes insofar as what's been happening or not happening. And frankly, I'm a little, as one individual, I'm rather, I guess, disappointed that for years this has been going on. And when the management change or control or administration was changed over, I guess, a year or two ago, was it assumed that everything was run well, or did you just find those factors out as you went into it? And that was the other question. Why did you change the type of control?
So I'll speak to that, if I may, Councillor Starr. The reason I wanted to provide some context to the audit was, without the context, you might have come to the conclusion that I either was not aware that there were some weaknesses in the controls in the shelter, or that I was aware, but I wasn't doing anything about it. So definitely I was aware that there were challenges in the shelter system. In the way that we were administering the contract, and Aileen has already spoken to the fact that it was much more informal than formal. As the shelter system has continued to evolve, the circumstances have changed and it has become much more challenging. If I go back to 2014, when the Salvation Army was awarded the contract, it's a very different system than it is today. So part of my wanting to look at the organizational structure and improve the accountabilities so that the outcomes were clear was to address what I was seeing, which were some weaknesses in the system. And I began that work prior to the audit. So yes, I definitely was aware that there were challenges.
Okay, I think I agree with the other members that we have to bring this report back, because I think this is one of the more serious ones we've seen. I'd like to see an organizational chart, by the way, to see who does what. I'm concerned also that in the overflow emergency, how do we monitor that? And I'm thinking that if we have overflow, we automatically send them into a motel, hotel. And I brought up this question to Michelle the other day. I mean, how do we even know that that person arrived at the hotel, or if they stayed there for 3 or 4 days, or the hotel just charges us for the week because that's how long they were supposed to stay there? There's so many minor questions. I think that unless there's a very good system of monitoring and administrating, we could be spending all kinds of money that we don't even have any knowledge that we're spending it for any good cause.
So I would like to speak to that, if I may. It's Janice. We are tracking the expenditures and we are monitoring the expenditures of anyone who is going into the hotel system. We do assign and do case management with individuals in terms of trying to find housing. For the benefit of the committee members who are not on council, we are bringing reports forward through the Strategic Housing and Homelessness Committee, working on evolving the system to be much more needs-based. So I absolutely agree with your conclusions. However, I do want to let you know that we are in the middle of a lot of these changes. We are bringing reports forward to change the system. I am working on organizational changes, and I did want to emphasize the fact that even under COVID-19, the business review and the implementation of the business review continues, because we recognize that having clear accountabilities is essential to achieving our outcomes, not just in housing, but across all program areas. So that work is definitely underway.
Well, that's good to hear. I just think that this is a growth industry, unfortunately. I hate to put it that way, and we're having to supply more and more services, and therefore that means more and more dollars and contracts, and to provide a quality type of service, I really think that it has to be administered and monitored in a better fashion, and I'm glad to see that you folks have picked that up. So. I would think that with the committee's indulgence, that you folks should aim for bringing a report back within a year, 12 months or earlier, because if you've been working on some of these items, I'd like to see an update on what's happening, COVID or no COVID. A lot of these items are, I think, areas that have to be addressed no matter what the situation is, and COVID has just unfortunately has certainly put a dent into everything. But if you've been working on this for the past while, I'm looking forward to comments from the committee. But I would like to see something back within 12 months and to see where we are, and hopefully that there's some great quality improvements.
So, Councillor Starr, I don't want to leave the committee with false expectations. We are definitely working to improve the internal controls and the outcomes. There is no doubt that COVID has had a huge impact on the shelter system, and it is probably not the right time for us to look at changing providers or even putting something out on competitively to look at a new provider. I think that continuity is very important, but I think we can work with the Salvation Army to put good changes in place.
No, I wasn't suggesting that. I'm just suggesting that the process, that you must have a process in place, what you're aiming for, to have a better system of controls and assessment and managing that. So if those are in place, then there should be probably improvements coming down the road, and tell us what you're doing. I think what we've heard today is we're working on it. And I would think that within a year, come back and tell us, okay, here's what we were working on and here's what we've accomplished so far. It doesn't mean that everything has to be done, because a lot of these are, A, B, C, or high, low, medium priorities, and we've done that before. But I would think that there should be, even if it's a minor report, but I think something has to be brought back, because as the audit committee, unless we ask those questions, Janice, we're not acting responsibly.
I absolutely agree with you. I just wasn't sure whether your expectation was that we would be, going out for a new provider or anything like that. No, we will absolutely bring a report back to tell you about the improvements that we've made.
I have a message here. Michelle Morris. Michelle, you're on the line. Would you like to address some of this?
Yes, good morning, committee members. Through you, the chair. I just wanted some clarification in regards to this request that we're discussing. Are you looking for an audit report, or are you looking for a report coming from management? I just wanted to clarify that if it's a report coming from audit, that my suggestion would be that it would be included in a 2021 work plan and be done closer to the end of 2021, just to allow operations to return to normal, and that the auditors would have a chance to actually observe the processes and controls that have been put in place. So if you can clarify if you're looking for a report from us, the auditors, or are you looking from a report from management?
I would say it's probably a dual report. That's my first thoughts on it, and probably aim for the third quarter of 21, subject to what the rest of the committee think. I think that's, 15, 18 months, maybe the third, fourth quarter, that'd be fine. And I think it's a joint effort. Yes, I think the audit group should be looking at what occurred and what's occurring and what changes are being made so that we can address those and be satisfied that that's the right direction we're heading in. So, Michelle, I hope that clarifies it. It wasn't immediate and it wasn't to upset your work plan, but I would think that it'd be just an adjunct to what you've done, some good work so far.
Okay, thank you.
No, I just asked the committee. I'm not sure if there's anyone else that has comments on that, but I think with a couple of speakers we've heard, we are concerned, and it's great to see that changes have been made or are going to be implemented and looked at again. But we're entering into an area here that because of COVID, it's really accelerated the need for a lot of additional services and put a real strain on everyone. But I think also we have an obligation to develop an action plan that's going to be working. Oh, okay, any other further questions or comments?
Hi, Chair. It's Stephen Dasco. I did put in a request to speak. Actually, just with regards to the reports that just came up, I would appreciate to have a report back towards the end of the year from management, and also have a separate one from audit. I wouldn't want to have both of them together to take an extra long period of time. I think having an update from management would be imperative as well by the end of the year.
Thanks, Councillor Dasco. And I would think that as management and staff work through this, it probably something that could be done. I looked at Janice to tell us that maybe, say, 6 months, 8 months, 10 months from now, at least a one-pager saying, here's what's happening and here's what's going on. A progress report, basically. Is that what you're asking for, Councillor Dasco?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yes, I absolutely support that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Any other further comments or questions? I don't see any emails flying in or hands raising from the wonderful staff out here. Okay, can we have a mover for the presentation to be received? And Councillor Sinclair, are you there? If not, we'll move on.
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Okay, will you move that?
Can do, yes.
Okay. Are there any objections? Any additions to the report? Anything else we should add? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you very much to everybody. I think it was a real good discussion, and I really appreciate what staff are attempting to do in a very difficult time, and also with a difficult part of the portfolio that I think really needs to be taken a good look at because of the accelerated needs. So thanks again. Okay. Number the 5.8, which is the land use development audit, that's here for information. Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Sinclair.
Yes, sir, thank you. This is an area of interest to me, particularly in Caledon. And I think part of the report that comes out of this might be to attempt to characterize the policy complexity that's faced here. And you have a list of 13 items that come under land use development. And I'd like to point out that the list could be extended to include the Greenbelt Plan, the Growth Plan, the provincial policy statements, and possibly the Lake Ontario Management Plan and the Great Lakes Act. It just goes on, and it's overlaid here and there in Peel. So I just make that point. So when you talk about doing the audit, effectiveness of the controls, that's where it's going to become quite an interesting discussion. And I have a big concern about risk in Caledon because of the White Belt area, which was created by the positioning of the Greenbelt boundary well north of Mayfield Road. And the area is characterized as the White Belt because it was colored white in the provincial plans. So predominantly it was a few crossroads hamlets and a lot of farmland. And there's absolutely billions upon billions of dollars to turn that into a basically a new city of some kind or another, and all the servicing costs and so on. And I point out that we have a process here where staff can have pretty good control. So there's an application comes in for something, and there's Planning Act requirements and other sort of office practices, and they process the application. Once it goes into decisions, there's the risk of an appeal. And I think staff have little control over the outcomes of that appeal. They can make best efforts. And I raise the example of the Bolton residential expansion study area and the appeals and chaos that's gone on through that. And it must have been going on for 8 years now since the start of the process. There's no decision in sight. Millions and millions of dollars involved in a massive LPAT hearing. So a big risk of economic loss for little gain. And the fight seems to be over allocating 10,500 people. Town of Caledon approved an option of area that is rumored to have cost $1 billion to service because there was no water and sewer pressure area in the area. And then you had regional council turning around and approving yet some other option. So I don't know how you're going to handle this. There's a major risk here to the region, and we're the center of a storm for major urban expansion in the GTA. And I even question the capacity once the lid is lifted from post-COVID. Does staff really have the capacity to keep up for the onslaught of development applications that will occur? So those are some of my concerns, Mr. Chairman, and I don't know if anyone wants to try and respond to that. Maybe we need an audit report at a certain level, and then maybe requests from the committee to go further in some areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sinclair. I don't see anybody on the board unless somebody wants to. Okay, we have
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Michelle Morris. So at this point of the audit, we've come up with the preliminary objectives and scope with the assistance of the staff in development services. But what's going to be important is when we actually do the risk assessment and to ensure that whatever we do is auditable. And I'm going to try to explain that. If something is auditable, it's something that's present, it's in existence, there's a process there, and we could actually do the work. But if it's something that's still quite unclear or not a clear process, or we don't fully control the process, if it's controlled by other levers such as the province, it may not actually be auditable. And that's why we have to scope it, and that's why we have to do the risk assessment. Usually we don't bring back to this committee the different phases of the audit. We were instructed to bring the objectives and scope, so we have done so. But the reality of when we do the risk assessment, before we get into the field testing, we have to ensure that what we're looking at is actually auditable, and it is something that the region has control of and can make decisions on, has authority to do so. And those things we can look at. But if it's going to take us to a realm that really is not under the purview of the region, it becomes unauditable even for us as the audit folks, in addition to the region itself. So I want to be clear with that, because when we talk about land use planning, there's the 30,000 foot land use planning, and then there's the 10,000 foot, the levers and the pieces that the region's actually in charge of. That could be audited, but the realm that's outside of the region, it's not auditable for us. So I just want to manage expectations in regards to this, of the things that we can actually touch and audit. So I hope that provides some clarity. I will be happy to take a question, but I know that it has to be something that we can actually audit.
Okay, I understand that part. I thought the Region Appeal Council was the approval authority for official plan amendments in the city of Mississauga, Brampton, Caledon. So it's that part of it, at least, is under the control of the regional council. But the politics around the table are not under control of staff. And there's a difference there between staff administering the application process, and then once it gets to approval, things can change. Anyhow, thank you, and I'm happy to move the report, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any other further questions, comments from our members? Seeing none, the report has been moved to be received. I don't hear any other comments, questions, objections. We'll consider the motion passed. Thank you very much. The last item on the report is the quality assessment results, and that's from the beginning of the agenda. And as I mentioned, we moved it right down to the end. So again, we'll go through the process. Are there any questions, comments?
Mr. Chair, Neil Fairhead.
Oh, Neil, yeah, go ahead. Just had difficulty hearing you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at the report, and it just strikes me one area. The crisis we're currently in is showing very clearly the importance of a quality response when a risk comes real. And time lost in responding is very difficult to recover. And I'm looking at part 3 of the report, Opportunities for Continuous Improvement. And it talks about helping other parts of the organization with advisory services, etc. And it talks about the assurance map, which is a presentation of what's being done. But what I don't see, and this is my question, I guess, is what work is going on to ensure that if we have to respond quickly, we can do it coherently, consistently, and quickly, because we've already got doctrines, methods, tools that have been practiced across the group, across the region, rather separately. So that's my question. Have we got that in place to take the lessons from what we're seeing every day at the moment, which is if it's not coherent and it's not consistent, it doesn't work?
Okay, I'm not sure. Michelle, are you going to try to answer this, or
should we put it off for a later meeting and just put it up as an advance question?
Through you, the chair. So I wouldn't be prepared to speak to that today. That's actually more a question towards management and their processes as opposed to an audit question. So I'm not sure if Nancy, you would like to speak to that?
I am here. Thank you, Michelle. Through the chair, if I may, I can certainly provide some information. The region does have a regional emergency management program. All our programs are trained in IMS structure. So for this emergency in particular, we do have a regional emergency operations center that has been struck. That group is working on the emergency with our internal programs, so as programs as well as an organization in its entirety. And further, it also bridges with emergency operations centers across the different local municipalities as well as our hospitals. Through that work, certainly happy to come back with more information, but through that work, they are ensuring that programs and systems continue to run. And in the case of COVID, it would be those essential services. So we have a business continuity plan that is maintained in the programs in a state of emergency. That business continuity plan is then brought up to the Regional Emergency Operations Center, where they work through it with the department leads to ensure again that we have the right resources at the right time for the services that are most essential given the emergency at hand. Further to that, the management team, the executive leadership team, acts as a policy group within that IMS structure, and we meet on a daily basis with REOC to ensure again that they have, the decisions are being made, they have the right resources in place, and we continue to move along in this process. And of course, within the IMS structure, there are 4 buckets of work being done: planning, logistics, finance, and communications. So that's a general overview of what that looks like, and certainly Michelle is involved. Michelle, as audit, represents the audit process in a number of those task forces that have been developed. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. I clearly need to understand more about the relationship between enterprise risk. Is it just auditing enterprise risk, or is there more responsibilities in that?
Well, what we do as well, and I think this may connect, but certainly again we're happy to come back, and we do have actually an emergency management committee, so we're happy to come back with further details. But as part of this process, there's also work underway that speaks to lessons learned, and that will when we come near the end of this hump into our recovery stage, then that's where a lot of the lessons learned, positive and negative, will be evaluated, and we will look at enterprise-wide as to how we need to improve a process, change a process, or we found a better way in conducting the work. So that is part of the IMS structure and the requirements out of the Regional Emergency Operations Committee. Center.
Thank you. That's answered my question, Mr. Chair.
I got a note here. Michelle, did you want to further address this, or is that satisfactory?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's satisfactory. I just have a comment after this report is received. I do have a comment.
Okay. Do we have any other further questions, comments? Okay, maybe we can have Mrs. Zuberi. You've been quiet out there. We usually hear from you. Are you out there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, maybe you can be the mover of this report?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. And having heard no further objections or comments, the motion passes. Thank you very much. And Michelle, did you want to speak after?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to let the members of the Audit and Risk Committee know that the Enterprise Audit Services work plan that was approved in February of this year, earlier this year, that based on the emergency that the region currently is in, it is unlikely we'll be able to complete that plan as approved. For a few reasons, which I will note now. in an emergency, the Audit and Risk Committee Charter and the Enterprise Risk and Audit Services Charters allows for audit staff to do non-audit work. And as such, some of the audit staff has already started being redeployed, so they're not actually performing audit work during this emergency. So that is one reason. And the second reason is that staff that we would need to work with are also tied up in responding to this emergency. Okay. So I did want to give the committee a heads up to let them know that it is unlikely that we'll be able to complete the 2020 work plan as approved at the February 2020 Audit and Risk Committee meeting. We will bring a report forward in the fall just to outline where we are and the status of our work plan. So if you have any questions, I'll be pleased to take that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Okay, moving on. I think that completes our formal part. We have 3 items of communication, 6, 1, 2, and 3. Are there any questions? Well, why don't we move them as a group? And do we have any questions on any of the letters?
Happy to move them, Mr. Chair. It's Karen Raz.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm happy to move the communications, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Hearing no other further comments or questions, I'll assume that the motion has passed for all 3 items. Okay, any other business from committee members or anyone else?
Yes, sir. Ian Sinkler. May I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I thought we were had in the work plan an audit for paramedics, and I assume that paramedics division is rather oversubscribed just now. And but I thought we were going to get a bit more of a memo on the scope of that audit at some point as a committee out of the work plan approval. Is that still forthcoming?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's Michelle Morris. So that audit is currently deferred as a result of them responding to the emergency, but when it is ready to move forward, absolutely, as per the resolution, we will bring the scope and objective, the preliminary scope and objectives to this committee.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else with any further business? Hearing none, we'll move on. We don't have any in-camera items. The next meeting, the May 7th meeting has been canceled, and we'll determine a new date in between that and the next scheduled meeting for October 1st. So we'll certainly speak with staff and what other reports are necessary in between. Otherwise, just we'll notify you if there is any changes to the real next meeting, which is October 1st, 20. Okay, any other further, just last comments, since this was our first meeting this way, and sometimes it's a little bit difficult since you can't look people in the eye. Hearing none, I have motion for adjournment.
Yes, move motion, Ian Sinkler.
Okay, all I'll say is once, all in favor, those opposed, carried. Thank you very much, and thanks for spending all the time.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Everybody else too. Keep safe, keep sanitized.
Thank you, Councillor Starr.
Thank you.